again?
If I'm to answer that question, I think we need to have a constitution that clearly defines the supremacy of parliament. It's like today when we say elections, or even when it comes to governance, we talk only about the president, the ministers, the cabinet, what they do, what they don't do. What about parliament, which is the arm of government that is there to ensure that the laws of the land passed in that house are being adhered to?
Okay.
We need to, like I said before, look at the section on the legislature and see how best we can improve on it to make parliament more functional and more dynamic. If we have a parliament that is more functional and more dynamic, then I think we'll see less of the problems we all complain about today. Because there are the arm of government that is going to see checks. Parliament has the right to call anybody in the public service or private sector to come and answer for any act that is deemed against the economic, political, or other interests of the state. Have we seen that happen in Sierra Leone? No. Because we have a parliament that is not functional. I would say this clearly. Our parliament is one of the wing of government or arm of government that is not allowing effective democratization and development in that country. Because most people go to parliament not because they want to go and talk about the nation, they go there for self-interest.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then. Thank you very much. Agnes and Umaru, do you have anything you'd like to say to that?
Yes, it's really interesting topic. And I think Mr. Boye Jambore has actually touched on something. Separation of powers is very, very, very limited in that country. And I think a lot of things are finely written in our constitution, but they are not being used. Maybe because of lack of education among the majority of the people, but again, because there hasn't been the political will, I think, since the Constitution came into force to actually do what it says or abide or regulate. The Constitution is there to organize, distribute, and regulate state power, and that has not been effective since 1991 because of too much power concentrated in one area or the other, or because of lack of the political will to actually put the Constitution to work. For example, it is written here I am reading something here about education, which says, the government shall direct its policy towards ensuring that there are equal rights and adequate educational opportunities for all citizens at all levels by ensuring that every citizen is given the opportunity to be educated to the best of his ability, aptitude, and inclination by providing educational facilities. Fine words all throughout. But when you really look at it, it is not reflecting. So yes, there are certain. The problem is not the written constitution itself, but we haven't been applying it. And of course, there are one or two areas that actually need looking at, and I think you have already put that in the agenda, so I will not touch on that now. But I'm just saying that majority of what is written in our Constitution is beautiful if it is applied. Well, I'm afraid it is not being applied, and of course, some updates have not been added in certain areas. But if we haven't done the groundwork or we haven't done the primary bit, how are we going to be able to apply the secondary bit? That is the update and the review.
Okay, thank you. And
okay.
before we go?
Yes, if I,
yes,
sorry, if I could just comment there, Kadi. Yes, I think it is interesting that Mr. Jamboria mentioned the issue of Parliament. I believe that we need a lot more separation of powers, but to be honest, I don't think it has to do with between the executive and the legislative arms. The problem in that regard largely has to do with the fact that we don't have conscionable politicians. As things stand now, Parliament has, by the spirit and the letter of the 1991 Constitution, oversight responsibility over the executive arm. Now, the point is, to what extent have consistent parliaments in this country been able to really do that devoid of the very executive interfering with their process? So that no matter how we try to enshrine this, it will boil down to the fact that we need conscionable politicians in parliament to be able to say to the executive arm, thank you very much, we belong to the same political party, but we think we need to checkmate you in these areas. Mm-hmm. That is one. But the other area where I think there should be a lot more check is that which exists between the executive and the judiciary, and this is very fundamental. For example, the president appoints judges. Is that separation of powers or is that fusion of powers? I think it is more of fusion of powers than separation of powers. Those areas should be clarified so that even if such an appointment has to go through parliamentary approval, the country's laws state that any appointment that requires parliamentary approval must be made by the president. But do we have enough checks and balances to be able to wiggle our way around this? If we have a despot as president, the Constitution gives him so much power that he can do everything, probably including turning a man into a woman. So I think we need to establish all those checks, particularly as it relates to between the executive arm and the judiciary, but also the police. There is so much control over the police by the executive arm of government, which I think is not also good. So in that regard, I'll agree with Mr. Jamboria that we need to establish or strengthen separation of powers. But I think it has to do more between the executive and the judiciary than between the executive and the legislature.
Okay, thank you very, very much. And I really do hope that our presidents don't go about changing men to women and women to men. Anyway, the next thing I would like us to talk about, which ties on neatly, and some of you have already touched on it, is socio-economic rights. Now, one such of these things is like the right to education, for instance. Now, a number of African constitutions have sort of incorporated socio-economic rights into their constitutions, but they're merely sort of stated as objectives and not enforceable. So it seems like we put all these ideas down and then we don't follow through or we don't intend to. And I think the states are usually afraid to cater for these rights because it involves spending money. For example, the right to education would involve building schools, providing other relevant resources. And education in Sierra Leone has been one area that has consistently been declining, and it is still declining. There's also the right to medical care. Again, that would involve investment money, building hospitals, providing medical care, drugs, and that sort of thing. So I think because of the amounts of investment involved, governments may be, they have been, across Africa, a little bit wary of actually making these things a must in the Constitution. So we tend to just gloss over them and state them in very woolly ways. What do you have to say in this regard with the rights, with the special focus on, socioeconomic rights? I'll start with you again, Agnes. What do you have to say?
Education has really gone downhill, and this has been a gradual journey from successive governments. From one government to another, we see a decline in our education. And this is really, really heartrending because we haven't got the to regulate education, of course, means we have to spend money. So we haven't got, again, the political will to say this is what we have budgeted for this particular area of educating people, whether it is a primary school or secondary or vocational or university. They seem to be funding the institution of education as and when, So we haven't really got to a point whereby our governments can actually tell us that for next year, this is what we have budgeted for all universities or these universities. This is what we have budgeted for primary education and secondary education, for starters. For example, I was shocked to learn that we have about 50 or more primary schools in the Kono district alone. And some schools have about 30 or 25 students, Hello?
Hello, yes.
Yeah, so it's not really, it's the regulation that is poor. We have the good intention, let me put it that way, because it's all written nicely, but we haven't got the regulatory system. We haven't got the political will, and it's all about budgeting. If the government says, we are going to concentrate on Forabe College, it has to have proper equipment, and then focus on that and equip it. Give it a timely time frame that within 6 months we want to achieve this in our education sector, in the primary sector, in the secondary sector. It will happen, but that is not really the focus of very many people in Sierra Leone, and it's a pity, because as we go year in, year out, we are seeing the decline of education. So that's the real concern there. There is a very big concern there, and until we get people who are more focused and who know the value of education and what they can actually put in place, nothing is going to improve, even if we write or rewrite the whole Constitution again. That's my take.
Okay, then. Thank you. And Umaru, what are your views on socioeconomic rights, especially the rights to education and medical care with regards to our Constitution?
Yeah, it's interesting because the socioeconomic rights, particularly in those areas, are not only confined to the content of our Constitution. Even some international treaties that this country has signed up to, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. That charter establishes basic fundamentals which we are not, basically living up to in Sierra Leone. We should probably try to put into context all of this that there are very limited resources. I know that we have so many minerals, but then the conditions under which these companies operate here are such that the resources that government needs will be very difficult to come by. Indeed, the Constitution establishes equal rights, like Agnes read out earlier from the Constitution, to education. And she interestingly mentioned Kono District, which is, by the way, my home district, my place of birth. And I visited Kono District recently, and I was shocked that a village which is less than 6 miles outside Koidu, less than 6 miles, it tells you, it gives you a picture there for us to how things would look the further you go into the district. And in that village, there's a school, and the school has a pupil population of about 126. They have only 2 teachers. One is the headmaster, and the other is his deputy. And only the headmaster is on payroll. The deputy headmaster is not on payroll. 126 kids. The further you go, like I said, the more apocalyptic the situation becomes. So you ask yourself, does having the structures alone suffice? My answer is no. So we need to get down to the point that there are obligations on government to provide education. You don't have to be in Freetown to get good quality education. Sadly, that's what things seem to be now. I was born in a village in Kono in Bumka. I managed to go to school and I learned something really of quality. You hardly can see any of those things right now. The healthcare sector. Before that, probably with education, teachers are very few, and even the few ones are hardly trained and qualified. Now, the health sector, there has been a deliberate and very impressive effort in the last couple of years